Hey folks, George here. This time we're going to conclude our discussion on global poverty, the moral issues around global poverty, and the obligations of rich countries and rich people around the world to help the starving people and poor people around the world. We will discuss Louis Pojman's article, World Hunger and Population. Pojman will give the rundown of Hardin's ideas, his lifeboat ethics, the libertarian response, and Singer's response that suggests we should give to marginal utility. We should give until we're just as poor as the people around the world in order to solve poverty around the world and stop global starvation. Now, in response to Hardin's lifeboat ethics, this echoes a lot of what Murdoch and Oaten had suggested in their own article. Recall that Hardin suggests that rich countries shall not help poor countries around the world because it leads to a tragedy in the commons. Pojman's response, again, echoes a lot of Murdoch and Oaten's response, which is, distributive justice haunts Hardin's argument. What does that mean? That means that the history of colonization, global commercialism, tariffs, cash crops, and bolstering dictatorships around the world has contributed to poor countries' conditions around the world. Furthermore, the lifeboat metaphor doesn't fit since technological capacity is such that we can, in the 21st century, feed all people. People in the 1970s were worried that the global population was going to explode so much that it would lead to global starvation. However, technology in the 21st century is such that there's plenty of food for everyone today. But Pojman acknowledges Hardin is onto something. Merely giving food or giving aid is not enough. There are intelligent ways that exist to aid these countries around the world. By the way, population growth is affected by many things: the status of women, infant mortality rates, healthcare, income, education, and inequality. So he, like Murdoch and Oaten, acknowledge some interesting points and some important points and some valid points that Hardin makes. But now let's move to Peter Singer's argument, where Peter Singer suggests that we shall help distant people around the world and we shall give to marginal utility until I am ultimately just as poor as they are, if necessary. Pojman raises the ideas of John Arthur. John Arthur suggests that this is too demanding. What Peter Singer is asking of us is too demanding. After all, should I give one of my eyes to a blind person? Singer seems to suggest that that is what morality demands. That everybody should be one-eyed until all blind people have eyes to see. Pojman says, an adequate moral theory must make room for self-regarding reasons. I am required to make reasonable sacrifices for others, but not at the cost of what would severely detract from the quality of my own life. Pojman's point here is that extreme utilitarians, like Peter Singer, confuse morality with extreme altruism or saintliness. Peter Singer seems to suggest that we all shall become saints. Pojman is saying that's not what morality is about, right? Rather, Peter Singer did give us a weaker principle that seems reasonable, that we sacrifice what isn't morally significant. Well, Pojman's card out of his back pocket is my life and my flourishing life is actually morally significant, so I shall not sacrifice myself for others. Now, Pojman moves away from Singer and addresses the libertarian response, like Robert Nozick or John Hospers. They say that there is no duty to give aid to distant, needy people. They, of course, reject the notion of positive rights. The only rights we have are negative rights. Positive rights are rights that say, I have a right to something. I have a right to education, right? To get something from somebody. I have a right to get health care from somebody. That is a positive right. Of course, Nozick and Hospers deny that. Negative rights is what libertarians support. Negative rights suggest that I shall have the right to be free of interference from other people. So I have the right to be left alone. That's the negative right. According to this libertarian position, these countries made bad choices for themselves. And they don't have rights to other countries' riches. They made their own bad choices. They have to live with those consequences. Pojman, however, says, wait a second, we do have duties to help others, even when we didn't agree to help others. What does Pojman say? Pojman gives us an alternative. Pojman suggests that different groups should learn to accept an intersocial core morality. Pojman says it makes sense to treat our local community as special. I live in New York City. I should support New Yorkers. I guess New Yorkers support the New York sports teams, for example, right? That's kind of the same thing. Is sports really that far-fetched, though? I don't think so, because after all, don't I treat my own family specially? I don't treat my family the same way as I treat everybody else. And in the same way, I don't treat my neighbors the same way as I treat people I've never met before, right? So your local community does matter, according to Pojman. This is due to the higher likelihood of reciprocity, that when I help my family members, they will later help me. When I help my neighbors, they will later help me, right? Whereas the distant relationships that we have with people around the world probably will not lead to reciprocity. That's the reason to treat local communities with a special attitude, with a little bit more generosity, let's say. In the same way I treat my family with more generosity, we treat our local communities with more generosity. However, eventually, you should expand from your family to your neighbors, to perhaps your nation, and ideally to the world, according to Pojman. First, this is just good. Isn't this just good to help people around the world? Second, this actually is in our self-interest. It does actually lend to a certain degree of reciprocity. After all, one nation on the other side of the world that is unstable can affect the rest of the world, as we see in the current international news. Back to Hardin now. Pojman admits that Hardin wasn't totally wrong. We do need to address corrupt systems and fix those systems. However, we should address those problems, the problems of corruption, rather than punish them. We should address the countries that are poorly managed and help them, not punish them. That's Pojman's point. So, food aid, according to Pojman, should be tied to some kind of responsible actions. For example, here's food aid. Do something like give more freedom to women in your community. Because, by the way, if you do give women freedom, around the world it's been shown when you give women freedom, guess what they don't do? They don't have as many children. Why? Because women know what their body is worth. Women know that they have other opportunities than merely making babies. So perhaps food aid can be tied to such responsible actions. Pojman gives the analogy of triage. What is triage? Triage is when there is an emergency, what do? You can't help everybody because there are such limited resources. What is the triage idea? That you help people whom you can most effectively help. Now, what does that mean? We can both give aid and encourage better systems. So, perhaps some of those countries that can be affected a little bit better in terms of the systems improving, perhaps, Pojman is suggesting, those countries should get priority regarding aid, right? And then finally, to wrap up, Pojman takes us back to Singer again. He does, for better or for worse, just ask too much of us. Morality isn't about turning us into saints. Remember, However, and this is where Pojman and Singer's point really hits home, Pojman admits we should all probably be giving a whole lot more than we currently are, shouldn't we? Talk to you next time. Bye-bye.